All right, we are now live and you may begin.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, October the 1st, held remotely. Let's start off with a roll call, please.
Chair Dennison.
Here.
Vice Chair Catalano.
Here.
Commissioners Dallas.
Here.
Hutt.
Here.
Pevsner. And Spears.
Present.
All right. Next up is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carried unanimously. Next up, we have the approval of the minutes from the September 17th Planning Commission meeting. Are there any edits or changes anyone would like to propose?
No objection. I'd move that we approve as they are.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Next up is the council liaison report. Mayor Capocha, if you're with us.
I'm here. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have any report, but just reading the staff report for tonight, I do have a concern, and maybe I'm just totally wrong or just not knowledgeable about what was discussed at the last meeting. But if I'm not mistaken, I hear a lot of discussion regarding SB 330. And my impression is that the Planning Commission has concern or doesn't believe that the staff's recommendations with regard to findings is consistent with SB 330. So I would just like to make sure that you guys discuss this a little bit and hear from our city attorney on that, because the staff report does say that the recommended findings by staff is consistent with SB 330. And I just want to say that I think it's going to be a big problem when this comes before the council if the Planning Commission has a belief about what complies with SB 330 that is different from our city attorney. So I just want to ask you folks to be perfectly clear on that we're going to have a problem if the Planning Commission's beliefs are inconsistent with what the city attorney is saying. So I just ask you to take a close look at that and maybe discuss that tonight, if it's appropriate.
And I think
Thank you.
Director Gonzalez has a new set of, not a new set, a revised set of findings. So is that something we're going to go over, Director Gonzalez?
We can go over that too. That's also in the report. In the
Okay,
staff
thank you.
report. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Next up is community input. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 5 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. Copies of the agenda are available for your convenience online. State legislation limits the commission's ability to take action on specific requests. It also limits the placement of items on the agenda for action 72 hours prior to meetings, except for specific findings. No action or discussion may be undertaken by the Planning Commission on any item if not posted on the agenda, except that commissioners or staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed by the public, or a commissioner or staff liaison may ask a question for clarification or make a brief report on his or her own activities. A commissioner or the commission itself may provide a reference to staff to report back to the commission at a subsequent meeting concerning any matter or may direct staff to place a matter of business on a future agenda.
Good evening, Commissioners. At this point, you do not have any callers for public comment.
All right, thank you. Please feel free to let us know if somebody does call in the next couple of minutes. Next up is public hearing. Consideration of Planning Commission Resolution 20-14, a resolution recommending to the City Council the adoption of an ordinance amending Chapter 17.20, Chapter 17.48, and Section 17.60.041, the design review permit of Title 17 of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code.
Thank you, Chair Dennison. So this evening, we're continuing a discussion from September 17th regarding streamlining the design review process. And included in the packet are exhibits A through 5, and those reflect revised subsections and sections of each of those exhibits as clean from the existing original code to include all of the comments that we've had to date over the numerous meetings that we've had. And also it includes the red line version from our last meeting. And this was prepared by the subcommittee. And Commissioner Hutt, would you like to go through those changes?
Yeah, I can go through those changes if we want to discuss that first. And these changes were responsive to the full Planning Commission's comments on the subcommittee draft, and also one item that was raised by staff in the interim. So if you go to Exhibit A, you'll see the red line on the R1 code. The first is in Section 17.20.027, which is on staff report, page 19. And the proposed change here to item B is, and this one is the one that's responsive to staff. Also, the subcommittee didn't really have a whole bunch of time to discuss, so we really sort of are bringing this live to the commission to talk in a fulsome way. The issue here is that you'll remember the existing code has a sort of step grid that on different size lots, and so if you have a smaller lot, the threshold for a design review permit is 2,500 square feet. And so one of the things that staff said was, if you have a percentage base, you might end up catching more than we had presently, especially as the size shrinks. We do provide that we wouldn't have finding 8 on those, but there's still this sort of gray area where you would have projects that would be subject to a design review permit under our proposal that wouldn't have been under current code. And so to address that concept, especially on the sort of lower end and smaller projects, we proposed this revision, which would have sort of a minimum level, and we put asterisks on that so we can, as a commission, discuss what that number should be. But if you are under that level, even if you're surpassed the 90% test, you wouldn't need a design review permit. And so the first question is, do we want to entertain that? I think that makes sense and it streamlines the code. Again, I didn't have time really to discuss that with other subcommittee members. The second issue is, if we do entertain that, what's the right number to put in there? And 2,393 is 90% of what's allowed on a 7,500 square foot lot. 2,500 is what is the current threshold in the code. So I think that's probably the right range to put it in if we decide to do that. So that's that concept. And then I also provide an example there of how that mechanism would work, just so it's easy to understand the code.
And also, if I could interject at this time, Staff was also looking at real life solutions and how this would apply. And what I'd like to do is share a table with you. It's an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to bring that up shortly. Are you able to see that?
No.
No.
Let me. I have to go to share screen, but I'm working with one screen and it's quite small here. And it is this one. Okay, there you go. So what we did is looked at basically the thresholds of calculating gross floor area and what would trigger a design review permit. So in this example, it is looking at all of our design review permits that we've had since 2018 to present. And as you can see, some of them are a new 2-story single family home that would obviously trigger design review under the proposed standards that Commissioner had just identified. And we have a garage addition. Another one is a new 270 square foot house that would require design review. The next one is an addition aligning with existing, so it's the rear addition. That would require design review in either case because it's over 3,500 square feet. The same would be true for the one above. And you can see that would occur on a couple of others. But what it does do is pretty much in terms of the proposed gross floor area calculations, the only project that would not be required under the new review procedure would be this particular one, which was a design review permit was required for a 2nd-story addition. And in this case, it would have been permitted by right under the new thresholds. And the 2nd-story addition, I believe this was the one that it had a small accessory structure at the rear of the lot, and there was an existing 2-story structure, but they added square footage both the 1st and 2nd floor, very minor. But that would be the only one under the current code, including once you get down to the 2nd-story revisions proposed, would not be required for design review.
I think that that's interesting to note, and I think it's also would be interesting to see the current projects or recent projects that didn't require review and how they came up to the limit, because I think a lot of times people design to the limits, and so there's some of those projects that somebody might have said, oh, I can just lose 40 square feet here and I don't have to go to a full design review. And so I think we've certainly seen that people design to the limits, and so hopefully some of those projects that did come before us maybe could have been tinkered with a little bit so they could get through easier as well.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out, that also in the staff report, it did indicate on page 3 of the staff report itself that pretty much all of the new construction or additions, 80% of allowed gross floor area, and new construction or addition, 90% of allowed gross floor area, and of course, new construction or addition of 3,500 square feet plus or minus or above, all will trigger design review by the commission. So we may want to revisit that or talk about that a little bit further. And the intent, I believe, of the city council is to reduce regulation overall in terms of streamlining the design review permit process. And I'm not sure if the percentages achieve that goal of the city council to reduce overall regulation. I think it's capturing a little bit more, or probably 90% of projects in lieu of going straight through to plan check. But if that's the intent, then that's the purview of the commission.
It looked like on that spreadsheet, and it wasn't up there for very long, but there were projects that, but for an angle plane infraction, would have gone through. Did I read that right?
Yes. And the angle plane, as you picked up, that one only went through because of angle plane. Not the size.
Right. That's what I was getting at. If they had not chosen to break the angle plane, that the new
Then
design
it would not. It would not go through the planning commission.
Right.
When I saw that list, a couple things, something jumped out at me. In 2018, there were 4 requests for design review, and in 2019, 10.
So in 2019, you can see from 1904 down to 1910.
So there are 6.
Yes.
So there's 4, 6, and what was
And then we had
in 2020 there are only 7. Okay, so we're dealing with a total of 17 projects.
Right.
How many projects in total happen during the average year?
We didn't calculate average, but this is probably pretty typical. I would say in probably 2016, 2017, I thought we had many more than in these limited cases here that were specific to design review.
Sorry, I wasn't being clear. That's my fault. Total number of projects. In other words, is 6 or 10 projects that go through design review, is that against 500 projects or is that against 20 projects? Are we 1% come before design review or 50% come before design review?
Probably, I would have to say maybe less than 50% come before the commission. Out of projects received, many of them are projects by right. They go straight through plan check. Others are administrative design review permits. And these are the ones that have gone forth to the planning commission.
How many by right happen in a year?
We did not go into that. That was going to be a little bit trickier and involve a lot more research. We did talk about that. How many of those projects come in for plan check that are below the threshold? My guess is that there's probably in excess of at least 25 to 50.
And Commissioner Spears, it's actually 21 DRP projects. I think you may have said 17.
So 21, because you go back to,
So there's 4 in 2018, 10 in 2019, and 7 in 2020.
are there 4 in 19 or 6?
There's 10, I believe, in 2019.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 10 in 2019.
Okay, yeah, all right. Thank you. That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to get a perspective on what percentage of all these things that come across the desk are things that we have to deal with, and by changing the thresholds, do we accommodate more people and bring that number down? and you're telling us that 50%, it can't be that 50% of all the things that come across the counter go to design review. 50% of the ones that need review? I'm unsure.
Well, it sounded like you said that ones that come over the counter by right is somewhere between 25 and 50 a year. Is that right?
Yes,
So if there's between 4 and 10 a year that come to the commission, and between 25 and 50 that are done by right,
many of those are just small additions, bathroom remodels, kitchen remodels, earthquake retrofit, new roof.
I have another question, another kind of question as an architect. My experience over 30 some years is that there is always, when a project is being developed, the opportunity to discuss in a fulsome way with staff about whether the project is being done as of right, whether there will be any discretionary review involved, what the thresholds are, and there are often decisions that are made after some intelligent conversation with staff that there is no good reason for to ask for a discretionary permission on something, and that things are able to be designed to be as of right. So there's always ample opportunity for this, unless somebody just has gone ahead, done all their working drawings, and now they're so committed they weren't smart enough to come in at an earlier stage of the game, and they're just going to be hardheads and say, all right, well, I'm gonna go for it regardless of what you say. However, good practice, especially with how complicated the discretionary process has become in most cities, is to be in early, talking about it before working drawings are really completed. So, I'm really very, very curious about what the conversations at City Hall are like about this, and how much advice applicants are really getting in a timely way about do you really want to go through this process, because it is a difficult and costly process. But if you just do X, Y, and Z, and I'll help you with this, we could avoid having to go to any discretionary review at all. Now, I've had plenty of this in my 30 some years, and so I'm just some of the things that come across to us, I'm really wondering whether the applicant really had enough good advice, or whether they were just being hardheads about, well, I want to exceed this angle plane for design reasons. I mean, this is this to me is like this honestly to me is like the elephant in the room while we're doing all these other things to try to minimize the amount. Do we really have a lot of people here crabbing because they just didn't handle things in a timely way, and they want what they want, and so we're getting to be the boogeyman about it?
Well, that's true to a certain extent. Many times people will come to the counter. Staff will meet with them and guide them through the process and explain what a discretionary or ministerial review is and what those thresholds are. Many times they elect to build below that requirement because they do not want to go before the Planning Commission. Others, they're doing a two-story residence, so they have, there's really no argument for that, or if they're over 3,500 square feet in most cases, or if they exceed the thresholds for a given lot size. Yeah, many times they are kind of caught in that situation and they have to move forward through the planning commission. Most are not very happy about that.
No, but excuse me, there are definitely some cases where you fall with your project, with the different regulations that you really do have to come before the commission and plead your case. And then there are things I've seen that are just so silly, like if you had just done this instead of that, you wouldn't have to be here.
Right. Or they get caught up, with the second story addition, but all second story additions under current code have to go to the planning commission. And as we've seen with accessory structures, I think one of them was on that list where it was a garage below. It had also a small first floor addition attached to the garage. They wanted to enlarge that slightly. There was already a second story addition above, and they wanted to enlarge that as well. But overall, that square footage was very minimal and very large lot, couldn't see the property. And it was, the commission, it was difficult, including staff, what are we going to do with this? It probably really shouldn't be going to the commission. And I think the second story modifications to the current code as proposed by the commission and the subcommittee are probably a better solution than what we have now.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really interesting on that list is many of that, probably the majority, were over 3,500 square feet. And those are going to get captured no matter what we do.
Right.
But I wonder how many of those where they also had a second story addition thought, well, I have to, because the way my lot is, I have to do a second story. And if I'm already going to the planning commission and doing full design review, I might as well ask for the big project. And some of those might have said, hey, if I could do a second story without the full design review, I can cut this other part down to be at 3,400 square feet and not have to do that. And again, I think that again goes into the issue of designing to the thresholds. I think that this was an issue that we discussed when we were implementing these thresholds. It was a concern that I had that if we put second stories in, that's going to trigger a lot of people. And then so you might as well just build the biggest house you can because you're already having to pay the big tax, so to speak. And so I hope more people can do their projects without having to do a full design review and get the second story that they need. And I think that'll change a lot. Also, I think that we've found that second units are much more prevalent and they're going to be in the future. And so taking those out of the square footage calculation is going to make it a lot easier for someone to do this. Because if you had a project that, where the total square footage, including the second unit, was over 3,500, you could just have the second unit accomplish a lot of your goals, and then also add to our arena numbers and help another housing unit come.
Director Gonzalez, can I ask, I know that the sheet that you put up on the screen for everybody, that's not in the packet. Can I ask that you include that in the minutes so it's part of the record?
Yes.
Thank you.
So having viewed the data that the director prepared for us, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Applying the real world application to what we're looking at is important. And it seems like the consensus as far as the conclusion that came back was people are butting up against that high end that they will continue to butt up against and end up going over and requiring a design review. Do we think that the numbers as proposed are good, or do we want to change them? I think is kind of our question right before us right this second. And I had a question towards the way that they were designed, Commissioner Hutt. If you're saying that it needs to come before the full design review at 90% of allowed gross floor area, which I think I calculated out to be 3,150. So anybody who builds 3,150 or above is going to end up before the design review rather than the 3,500 that is today?
No, the percentage is based on what the lot will allow. So you have to figure out what the allowed gross floor area is for the lot, and then take 90% of that. So it's not a metric based off the 3,500.
Okay, so then if you have 20,000 square foot lot,
Mhm.
then you could build right up to 3,500 without a design review?
Right.
So this is to be
Where-
applicable to smaller lots.
Right. If you had a 7,500 square foot lot, you couldn't. For a 7,500 square foot lot, where that 90 would hit would be 2,363. And that's why, you know, we thought about, well, on that lower end, maybe you move that one up to the 2,500 and say, even if you're 92%, if you're building 2,400 square feet, you don't need a design review permit, because we're just not gonna do that kind of full rigmarole on a smaller project.
So then we also have to think about, are these thresholds too restrictive? Are they implementing the goal of reducing regulation? Did we want to drop them, raise the threshold?
Is there, Commissioner, can you, I'm trying to think of why there would be a reason to not just cap it at the maximum, the greater or the lesser of the maximum allowable or 3,500.
Well, the question there is whether you want to have the 3,500 is the target that for the very largest ones, and whether you want to have some level of review before that. And again, we have sort of 3 different levels of review, right? We have 4. We have of right, we have administrative design review, we have design review without finding 8, and then we have design review with finding 8. And so the 3,500 is design review with 8. And then we've got the 80 and the 90 in the middle spaces, and anything under that is of right. So, and those, again, those thresholds aren't set in stone, and if we want to move them, we can. The issue is, as we've seen on projects, when people are trying to maximize square footage, it starts to get more difficult to have good design. And if you have, so if people are trying to push that envelope right to the edge, that's where you want to have some sort of review and make sure that those projects are good and not impacting their neighbors. And if they're smaller, they tend to not, just by their nature, impact their neighbors.
So to simplify the chart as it is, we could contemplate 80% and above being ministerial? Or do you have concern about that 90% number?
I had concern about the 90% number as it applies to some of the smaller lots.
Right, and that was addressed by the by putting in a minimum at 2,500, so that if you had a smaller lot, you wouldn't be hitting that the 90% threshold. You'd have the ability to go above that. And I think if you think about the step way that we have now, where it's at 2,500, 3,000, and then 3,500, you get close to an approximation of that already.
I guess I didn't see the 2,500 minimum or didn't understand that. I'm sorry. Where is that?
So in current code, okay, which one are you talking about? In the red line?
Yes.
Yeah, the proposed says that you have an 80 and a 90, right? But even if you're above 90, if your project is under 2,500 feet, you don't need a design review. You just need an administrative. So it has to be above 2,500 and above 90.
Okay.
And so that streamlines for the smaller projects.
Does that alleviate your concerns, Director?
I believe the interpretation of that is correct. My understanding when we first were addressing this, I think I brought a table before the commission about a year ago, where it attempted to say anything below 3,000 square feet would be at the director level, and anything above that would be captured by the planning commission. And then probably on the smaller end, those would be by right. But any new construction, single story or two-story, would have a requirement that would be would go to the commission, and also a licensed architect would have to prepare those plans.
That sounds good.
So I have that table if you want to, or that section, this section 17.20.027 that I had shown the commission, I think, in one of the very first times we reviewed that. So let me pull that up just so we can have a look at that real quick.
Just so the record's clear, anything we pull up on the screen that wasn't in the packet, let's just also include it in the minutes.
Yes. So this is the same section we were looking at. This is the section B that we were referencing. And then what was approved or proposed by staff at that time was allowable gross floor area of all structures on a single lot that exceeds either by addition or new construction in the amounts indicated below. So lot areas up to 11,000 square feet, you would be able to build a 3,000 square foot property with a design review permit. And then lots larger than 11,000 square feet and up is 3,500 square feet would go to the commission. And here we had a design review permit shall be required for all new ground up construction, and such plans shall be prepared by a licensed architect. So this was very, very simple. That was proposed probably about a year ago.
Yeah, and the first part mirrors the existing code with just the first tier removed for the lots up to 7,500.
Right.
So we've just taken 2,500 up to 3,000. The concern I have with the sort of stepways is that it is more lenient to lots in the lower end of that band than the higher end of that band. So if you have an 11,000 square foot lot, this puts a trigger in at 85%. And it seems to me it's just more equitable to have it a percentage because you know the floor area is based on a percentage. So why do we have this step thing where if you're lucky enough to be in the higher end of the band, I mean the lower end of the band, then you're great. But if your lot is just a little bit smaller, then you have this smaller threshold. And so that's why, to me, I think the concept of having a percentage basis, and we can talk about whether we think the 80 and the 90 are the right numbers, but that seems far more equitable to me. And then the new construction, you know, requiring a design review permit for all new construction is not reducing regulation.
That is not, I think at the time we were trying to avoid properties from escaping any kind of design review that went for brand new from the ground up, that went straight through plan check. So I just wanted to show you what an example looked like that was very simplified. But as Commissioner Hutt mentioned, we could consider revisiting the percentages of gross floor area.
Well, that would just be one simple statement then, right?
No, it would still look like what's being proposed by the commission, by the subcommittee. But as Commissioner Hutt pointed out, maybe that went down from 90% down to 85%. But I think more analysis would be required to make sure that that still worked.
On the smaller properties, the 7,500 square feet and less, or less, those, I think you suggested, Vincent, that that would be at a director level for 2,500 square feet or less. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And that, it seems like that's where we get more of the pain from the extensive planning commission review and everything else. Am I correct there? And if we're trying to make the whole process smoother and easier, it's like that's where we need to focus on the pain relief. And so I would be in favor of making something like that at a director level. But I don't have as much experience on the commission as the rest of you, so I don't know what that kind of means.
Well, I think we've talked about doing that and saying that everything under 2,500 feet would be a director level or of right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring this forward for further discussion so we can go through some of these issues, see real life examples of what the commission has reviewed. And if the commission feels that what is presented by the subcommittee is where we want to head, we could move on.
It doesn't sound like we came to a conclusion about any of that.
No, but I think we do need to keep in mind that our remit here is that we have to finalize this by our next meeting. So it doesn't mean that we can't tweak this. As we know, unlike the findings going forward, the thresholds can be changed, at least under current state law. So if we find out later we think these need to be raised or lowered, we could do that. But we do need to make up our mind pretty much conceptually today so that at our next meeting, we can have the final papers and approve them.
We really have to see how significant this is and its impact in comparison to what the council started out asking us about. I don't know. It seems as though it's a couple here, a couple there in terms of who gets pulled in, who doesn't get pulled in. A couple of projects. Am I wrong? I mean, it seems to me to just be a couple of projects a year this way or that way that we're talking about here. And of course, that's always subject to just what comes in across the counter.
Yeah, I think really big houses are gonna be really big no matter what. And I think everyone agrees that those need to get full review. So it is a question of, streamlining for those smaller projects that we wanna not be so onerous on and make sure those don't get caught up with the bigger ones.
Yeah, the big ones, when you're designing something, that's in the let's say the 4,000 square foot range, generally speaking, that if there's a threshold that is at 4,100 versus 4,250, you'll work with that. You have plenty of latitude, unless you're really greedy. You have plenty of latitude when the overall project is that big to make some adjustments. If I'm driving down the highway at 90 miles an hour, and I have reason to cut it down to 85. It's not really a big deal.
I am more in favor of being a little permissive on the thresholds and adjusting the thresholds as opposed to going back and redoing our design review in total. Because I think the thresholds, we can always come back and revisit because we still own that part. But because of 330, once we commit to a whole new section of design review, then we're locked into it and we own it forever. And the changes are going to be much more onerous. And I think the challenges to the city on all levels are going to be much greater. And so I'm a little more conservative about what my exposure is to the rest of the city. I'm a taxpayer here too, and I don't want to see us create a condition that that becomes a liability to the city and uses the city's limited resources. So if we change thresholds now, we can always come back and revisit them as we see how the process works and what comes before us. And I'd much prefer to do that as opposed to rejigger the entire design review process.
Bob, I'm definitely down with you on that one, and I want to add to this that looking at the way the alternative design review guidelines have been written, the way they have been presented, they're not objective. Okay, we're not really, anybody from the outside who legally wants to tear us up about those, if they were what made it into the ordinance, could really tear us up. Okay, I've spoken here before about the fact what's objective and what isn't objective, and the alternative that I've seen here from staff so far, honestly, from the way 330 is stated, it is no more, and the council has to understand this, it's no more objective really than, I wish I were a lawyer, I could have a ball with it, okay? No more objective.
Mr. Catalano, if you'd like, we can go over those findings, but when we reviewed them, we concluded that, yeah, this probably meets the standards set by state law. So if you'd like, we can go through them and we can discuss what your concerns are. But for the time being, know that we reviewed it and we've concluded that, yeah, this probably satisfies the objective criteria.
Okay, I'm stating my opinion about it.
Another time, after we go through here. But I will also point out that probably it is not the standard that I'm comfortable with if we're the first test case
in California. Yeah.
Yeah. But to me, more important than the legal vulnerability is the fact that we can't go back. We lose our current findings. And so, as Bob and Joe said, if we change the thresholds and we figure out, hey, we didn't do a good job on this one, it should be higher, and this one should be lower, or whatever, we can change. If we change the findings, we're done.
Well, I agree.
We just throw the whole thing out.
And we can always change the findings going forward as well. It's just that we will lose the subjectivity in our current findings is what we lose. But we can always choose to amend the findings to create new objective findings.
Okay, so to make it easier process, which is what the council is asking for, why don't we change the threshold on the new construction or addition for under 7,500 square feet to a director level review? That would seem to make it easier in a notable way. And then we can always change that back if it turns out that it's causing, discord in the communities that have smaller lots.
Well, if you look at the 2,500 feet, which is current code for the threshold for a 7,500 foot lot, that is basically 95% of what's allowed. So, I mean, if we really wanted to streamline this, we could say instead of 80 and 90, we could say 90 and 95, and then say anything under 2,500 doesn't require a design review permit. I mean, that would be very permissive.
Alex, I'd like to say to you that one of my alternatives that I'm considering for my next life is to go from architecture school directly to law school and be licensed architect and also a member of the bar, because I would be arguing that very, very differently than you know, the way you're viewing it. And you need to remember that if there's a contention about this, whether it's at the legislature or with you and somebody and an applicant here, or whatever level that it's on, that it's going to be arising not necessarily from the legal corridor, but it could be arising from the standpoint of what the designers for the project want to do. And I think that and that can be for aesthetic reasons, that can be for cost reasons, or lots of other things, planning reasons. But I think that something arising from the design quarter, which wants to be argued about objectivity or not, is not going to be what the lawyers are expecting. That's where I'm coming from about it.
If I might respectfully ask that we hold this part of the conversation until we get to that part of the meeting and make some progress. I think we'll be here all night if we bounce
I
around.
thought we were going to be out of here by 8 o'clock tonight, you know?
No such luck, sir. So towards that end, why don't we bring around the conversation back to the thresholds that we're discussing? And so
Pleased to do that. Pleased to do that. I did not want to go into it in depth tonight, okay?
So let's start with the thresholds that are currently before us. It sounds like the choices that we have are to modify the thresholds or discuss what those thresholds should be at or accept them as proposed. So maybe we can keep the conversation on that till we resolve this particular one.
Yeah, my preference would be to leave the 80 and 90, but institute the 2,500 so that's a bar for smaller projects. But if people think that moving the 80 and 90 up to 90 and 95 is preferable, that wouldn't give me a bunch of heartburn.
I think in lieu of what we've been asked to do by the city council, 90 and 95 would probably fly better. I think they're looking for a more permissive environment. Not that I agree with it, but I think that's what they're looking for, and I would rather settle for that than fight it.
Is the 2,500 minimum or maximum the right number? Is the 3,000 level that has been proposed by staff the right level to move that to?
I'm confused.
So there's two separate elements. There's if you are below 2,500, you're by right. If you are above 2,500 and above a certain percentage, you're either administerial or design review. Am I summarizing that right, Commissioner Hutt?
Close. You could be under 25 and still be administrative if your percentage is over the percentage limit, but you couldn't be a full design review. So to me, doing if we move that number to 3,000, that's most of the lots in the city, the smaller lots that you'd have I mean, people would build right to the max. I mean, you'd be setting that bar above the max square footage on most. So you'd be giving up design review in all instances there. And I don't think I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. So then do we think that what were we recommending? 90 and 95? Is that where we're 90 and 95 with 2,500?
That will get the job done with the city council, and that's what I prefer. But not because I think it's right.
Well, Bob, if you think that's not right, shouldn't you make your recommendation on what you think's right? I mean, the city council can easily change that number themselves if they don't agree with you.
I haven't seen the city council take that much effort into looking at the details.
95% seems awfully close to 100, and if we just took that whole thing out, the whole code would be simpler. And
Meaning that it was administerial from 90 up?
Peggy needs a bigger screen.
it's all just very confusing. I mean, whatever.
So
There's confusion of requirements and there's confusion of the way the code is written. It's just it's very complicated.
Commissioner Hutt, did you have something?
you know, I can live in a big range of this. I think eliminating design review on all projects under 3,500 feet is too much for me. I think as people, the issue with the small houses is I think we want to make them streamlined, but if somebody's maxing out the floor area and they're on a small lot, you know, they're going to be close to their neighbor, and that's something worth looking at. So again, I'm okay if we slide that a little bit, but if we effectively slide it to 100%, say, you know, no design review, you know, I think that's a problem. We used to have a long time ago, the code was just 4,000 feet. And it was, we put in this whole step system, particularly because there were instances where people on smaller lots were maxing out the square footage and people were being concerned.
What about the idea of it being strictly administerial above a certain percentage? So removing, if it was 90 and 95, rather than it being 95 at the Planning Commission, what if it was 90 and above administerial?
And do you get rid of the 2,500 altogether and just make that?
I was not making that recommendation. I was saying rather than having two tiers, where
Yeah.
at 95 it pops up to the Planning Commission, why not leave it at staff level from that lower threshold?
That's very much more permissive.
I'm just asking questions about the different alternatives. It sounds like there's concern with that.
Right.
Are there instances, Director, where you, I guess if you're not comfortable with it, then you can always refer it up to the Planning Commission, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what would be the things that you would see that would have you refer to us?
Generally,
Applicants would want to know what the grounds are for bumping it up to us.
well, if I was asking an applicant over the counter on a conceptual level to modify the design, use different materials, or address the site design, the siding of the building on that lot, they refuse, then I would say that I still have concerns with that, and my recommendation would be to bring it forward to the Planning Commission. Usually that would get their attention and they start making adjustments to their plan.
How often do you get serious arguments at the counter like that?
My
That's
staff
not-
rarely get to have serious arguments with people at the counter. Myself, I've had a few.
Maybe I asked it the wrong way.
All right, do we feel like we have consensus here? Or do we feel like this is not something that's gonna get solved tonight? I worry that we need to, we've got to have this in a bow by the next meeting.
I think we need consensus tonight. We need to iron this out, and
I think so.
I think
We can do that.
My concern is that we have some degree of review is because while we enjoy the services of an excellent director right now, I've been around long enough to see a few other directors who are less emphatic and are less skilled, and we're still living with the results of their behavior, their shortcomings. And so, you know, on the other hand, if it's the city council that wants things to sail through the department, then you know that's going to be part of what we are, the baseline for our decision. But I'd like to at least hold on to some sense of review so that we can at least have some say. So when something is that crazy that comes to us, then we can back up the department and the director and say, no, it needs to change. And also the fact that you know, he or she has that leverage with the applicant.
Yeah, I think one other thing to keep in mind is that an applicant can pretty much work around this rule by providing a second unit, which we don't count the square footage of. And you know, that's going to do two things. That for one, it's going to break up the massing of the main building, and we saw instances in the past of sort of smaller, especially skinny lots where people massed all of the stuff together and it looked a lot bigger than it was. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to help facilitate one of the other goals that we're done here is to try to encourage affordable housing, which is the whole purpose for all this, the state law. And so second units will help us meet our RENA numbers, will help the state affordability crisis. And if you're looking at a threshold at 2,500 square feet or 3,000 feet, you could easily build a 505 square foot second unit and drop below that threshold, and then you can build it right.
So 90 and 95, is that the thresholds that it sounds like we have arrived at?
I can live with that.
That works for me.
All right.
Okay,
Commissioner Pevsner?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, then I guess we've solved that one.
Okay, great. Then the next issue on page 20 in the staff packet on 1720-050A2 is this sort of relief from the prevailing setbacks. And at the last meeting, we discussed whether we wanted this to be administrative level or planning commission level, and we decided administrative, so you can see that that is changed. Hopefully nobody wants to change their mind back.
And I noted on 17.20.053B, still have to correct the angle plane here. It says plan.
Yes, good catch.
Where are you? I didn't follow you, Vincent.
On
Oh,
on page 21, the very bottom paragraph B, it should read angle plane, starting the paragraph at B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're good on that. Okay, moving to on page 21, 1720.053A3. This is that we added the administrative design review permit as a relief vehicle in case there was a neighbor that had a bunch of windows or balconies and you couldn't design your house very well based on that. Are we good with that?
Good.
Okay, then we can skip Exhibit B, which is just the clean of the whole thing. And move to Exhibit C, which is the amendments to the design review permit. And on page 54 of the staff packet, number 1760.041E, we've deleted the new language on the compatibility, which we thought had concerns about potentially being considered a subjective finding. Everyone good there?
Yes.
And then moving to Exhibit E, staff packet, page 57, the new paragraph 1760.058B. This is the, if you have 4 or more staff level discretionary permits, it bumps up to planning commission level. And that that's a rule and an example so people can see how it works. And if there's any questions on that, we can talk about it.
This report with the page numbers printed on it is so much easier to read. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I totally agree. Staff, that is a very helpful thing.
Actually, on the printed documents, the originals that I have, I don't have those page references. That only appears once it goes into Municode and it's uploaded. So, but I agree, it's very difficult to follow without that.
Does anyone have any questions on how that process works with the 4? I think it's pretty straightforward. But there are a lot of cross references just so that people can see the administration and how it functions.
Yeah.
So then it sounded like there is another version of the design review standards for that staff has to present.
Those are included in the staff report as a clean version, not a red line version.
And just to ensure that this is a productive discussion, I ask that we not discuss what is or is not legal. As we've discussed in closed session, that's not helpful for open session. What I prefer we discuss is if there's ambiguity or if you think there's subjectivity somewhere, feel free to point those out and then we can discuss those. But let's avoid discussions of legality, please. And if we want to have that discussion with me, feel free to email me and we can discuss that via email, because that's attorney-client privilege.
I have an issue with that. as a lawyer who's analyzed this myself and has come to opinions independently and not based on any information that I received in closed session, you're making it hard for us to debate this. And one of the big concerns that we have, and I think that the mayor told us that was that you know, if we have those concerns, we need to speak them, is the fact that there is potential legal exposure. And to me, it's not really so much a question of is it legal or not. That's something that a court decides. It's a question of whether we want, as a city, to be the guinea pig to test that. And I don't think a discussion of that functionality is a closed session item. I think that's very much something that we should discuss as part of the legislative process. Do we as a city want to be on the vanguard here?
Commissioner,
and that seems to me not a good idea for a puny little city with a puny little budget.
I think your point is valid, but I don't think it's valid for the Planning Commission necessarily. The City Council will have the opportunity to weigh those factors. You can write directly to the City Council about your concerns, but I feel like it's more helpful for the City Council if the Planning Commission points out what vulnerabilities in terms of subjectivity and ambiguity there are in the findings that we presented to the Planning Commission, as opposed to us now debating what is or is not legal with respect to SB 330. The City Council will receive a memo. The City Council will have a closed session on this item. The City Council will be briefed. They'll have that discussion, and the City Council ultimately makes that decision whether the city wants to take that risk.
I think that one of the points that the commissioner brings up is valid, though. We have been vigorously encouraged by our City Council liaison to ask these questions in open session, and vigorously encouraged by you to not ask these questions in open session. So maybe the two of you guys can get together and give us direction so that we're not caught in the middle of the two directions, one from city attorney and one from the mayor.
Mr. Chairperson, could I make a suggestion?
That would be
just
great.
clarify. I want to,
That'd be great,
maybe I wasn't clear on what I said. So let me try to clear that up. I really agree with the city attorney. You should not be discussing the legal aspects of this. What I'm really trying to say is, if there is a belief that the Planning Commission has a difference in a legal opinion, that's what's given to us by our city attorney, I can guarantee you that we are going to listen to the advice from the attorney that we pay. That's what we pay him to do. We don't pay you guys to give legal advice. As the city attorney says, you're free to make your opinions clear, but it is not productive at all for you to be discussing this. If you want to give your opinion to me, do it in writing, and we will discuss it in closed session. But I'm just here to tell you that if there's a conflict between your opinion and the city attorney's, it's very, very unlikely that we are going to go against the advice of our city attorney. So hopefully that helps.
I don't think there's a conflict, but given the understanding of what we were told, keeping a more suggestive list of findings at the time being is much more prudent for the city of Sierra Madre, because we can't go back. The original really clean, streamlined findings that the staff presented were very clean and really sanitized and objective. But once we adopt those, we can't put an ounce of subjectivity back in, is my understanding as a commissioner.
So Commissioner Dawes, I think your point is well taken. But that's not what I guess the disagreement is about, because ultimately whatever the Planning Commission approves, that's what will be going before the City Council. I don't think I don't want to speak for planning staff, but the City Council is going to be given multiple options, including the Planning Commission's recommendation. So that'll be before, and then in closed session, they'll also have the opportunity to weigh the legal benefits of changing design review versus changing the findings.
Thank you.
To extend that, you know, we may be we may be a guinea pig among smaller cities. There are some larger municipalities that have attempted to respond to what they believe to be objective kind of findings, and they're extremely rigid, extremely prescriptive. And I think that I feel as though if we were ever to, at the commission, have to work with those and work with an applicant, that there would be plenty of difficulty, plenty of grief all around on that. We're just not a prescriptive city at all. And I've seen, looking around, some very, very rigid prescriptive kinds of things. So in the next biggest picture, I think there's trouble down the line going in this direction.
All right, so Vincent, Director Gonzalez, why don't we start looking at what has been proposed by staff? Can you direct us to where in our packets we can find that?
So in the staff report, that is on page 7, towards the bottom of page 7, and it starts at section 17.60.041, design review permit. A, the purpose statement is unchanged. B,
Are there pages, I'm sorry, are there pages missing?
I don't
On
see
page 8, I have the opening paragraph only.
in the staff report,
Yes.
which is, it should say section 17.60.041, design review permit. Do you see that on? Now, your page 7 is going to be different than my page 7. So my page 7 is the staff report page 7 that's highlighted on the header.
I believe it starts at page 16 of the staff report of the packet.
Okay.
Yes. Well, it looks like it begins on page 7 of the staff report. Yes, that's page 15 of the packet.
Okay.
At the bottom, it starts section 17.60.041. Thank you.
Correct. So A is unchanged. B was unchanged. So C is where we did make changes. What we're looking at is a clean version of that. I didn't include the red line in the staff report itself. But this reads, it's the review procedure. Administrative design review permit shall be noticed, processed, and may be appealed in compliance with requirements of minor conditional use permit, provided, however, that the director may refer any application for an administrative design review permit to the Planning Commission at the director's sole discretion, and a design review permit shall be noticed, processed, and be appealed to compliance with the requirements established for a conditional use permit. Actually, I think we retained that language as well. So the changes began in subsection D, findings. So these are the actual findings that we were discussing. So the first one, before an administrative design review permit or a design review permit is granted, the application shall show to the reasonable satisfaction of the reviewing authority the existence of the following facts. Number 1 is the proposed project is consistent with the general plan and zoning code and any applicable zoning standards. That's unchanged. Number 2 is the proposed project will not invade the privacy of adjacent residential structures by creating vantage points that provide views to the interior of adjacent residences or rear yards. Where balconies or windows provide views into interior of adjacent residences or rear yards, the applicant must take one of the following actions to promote neighbors' privacy. And there are 3 subcategories. And
I have a question about that.
Yes.
in number 2, it says plant vegetation to provide screening within 3 years. How will that be monitored? And how will the person who monitors that know that the applicants fulfilled the promise they made at the time?
That would rely on staff to revisit some of these conditions that would be imposed as part of the project.
I'd like to see it in writing, because this is, I mean, it's easy for them to say, oh yeah, no problem, I'll plant all the trees you want, and 3 years goes by and they decided to put in cactus instead, or whatever it's gonna be. And the person that goes out there 3 years from now just got hired 2 years ago, and so they don't know, they didn't see the initial application. And this is a city that doesn't respond unless somebody complains, so it may never happen.
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is, other than protected trees, there's no prohibition on people cutting down any landscaping. So if I plant vegetation that provides screening within 3 years, and then in some later date chop it down, I'm still in compliance with this because I did plant the vegetation. And
It died.
I chopped down the vegetation. So this is a total loophole that makes this finding effectively worthless.
So I think these conversations, exactly these types of conversations are helpful because they point out weaknesses that maybe staff didn't consider. So to address Commissioner Hutt's point, there could be a condition placed on the property so that like some kind of deed restriction where this type of whatever is planted is a certain type of plant. So it grows a certain length of the number of years, or it could be there for a certain number of years so that they can't cut it down. These can all be added to the condition.
That's a lot of complication. I think that you should just strike 2 out of there and rely entirely on just the architectural configurations to solve the problem. And then it's done.
I would agree.
Well, my concern is that then now once this goes into effect, then the city is obligated to fulfill the requirement. And this is one more job the city has to take on, watching who's doing what. And I would prefer a process in which when permission is granted by either the director or the commission, it's done and that's the way it's going to be. We still have a problem where people, they nod and smile at us and then build whatever they want. And we don't have a system in place where someone goes out and said, hey, you said you were going to do this, but you did this. And we have no way of enforcing it because we don't have the depth of staff and the wherewithal to do it. So, you know, my concern is, okay, if we want to go down this road, we have to have a process in place to do it, and it has to be funded by the city, and it has to be something that we can do. I'm kind of not in favor of us having trees that are in somebody's deed that says you will never cut this tree down, because now we're checking on the trees and we can't even check on, you know, parking places, much less trees. So, yeah. You know, I would prefer a cleaner and more resolved and objective process so that it is what it is when we're done and not after that.
Okay, staff will remove that subsection 2. I agree with your comments.
Yeah, I'd also like to note that I don't think deed restrictions are streamlining the process.
No.
And also just to the code enforcement and deed restrictions, they require a lot of effort and often don't work. And I can tell you on my house and in my entire cul-de-sac, there is a deed restriction that you can't build a second story. And more than half of the houses on my street have second stories. So that deed restriction did not work. And I don't have any faith that it would here. It just faith that it would make the process more difficult and costly. But I think if we wanted to talk about this, the other issue that we had is, what does provide views mean? Does that mean direct views, oblique views? I mean, I think you can generally look out a window and see in anybody's rear yard, at least at like some minor angle. And so if you're going to read this objectively, I think this finding is going to be triggered on most projects, if not all. And so then people are going to have to choose which one of these items they pick to mitigate this. And if we take off 2, they do 1, lower the floor top plate height or the building pad elevation. We don't have anything that says how much. So I could lower my top floor plate by 2 inches, and I have therefore mitigated this issue.
Yeah, do you see all the judgment that is in here about what's going to work and what isn't? It's not objective.
And staff and legal counsel met a couple of times over a number of hours, and we came up with these same concerns as well, that it does impose additional regulation to the applicant and also adds cost. And what we ended up coming in agreement to the most part is, for these to be effective, they almost have to read more like design guidelines, and that's a whole different level of review that we would have to move forward with and get council buy-off to create design guidelines.
Yeah,
Did I take that correctly?
And just to echo Director Gonzalez's point, we talked about Santa Barbara last time, where they have a 17-page long design guidelines that references 11 other sets of guidelines that are 70 to 100 pages long. So this is not, drafting a set of objective guidelines that works is not something we can do by next meeting.
Well, it's really streamlined.
And I think if we try to take these findings, and we should continue going through them, and make them as objective as possible, effectively, there are going to be no constraint. And all we're going to do is have a design review process that requires people to come to the planning commission, spend $3,000 to $4,000, have a public hearing. The neighbors, if they don't like it, are going to come and complain, and we're going to say, we have to approve this because really there's not much we can do about these findings.
Just to address Commissioner Catalano's point, when Commissioner Hutt said, oh, you can reduce it by 2 inches and you satisfy it, that's true, you can, the way it's written. And if you do it by 10 inches, you satisfy, and that's true, you can. But just because there's that variation doesn't mean it's not objective. It's objective in the sense that you can reduce it by any of that. That range doesn't make it any less, doesn't make it more subjective. It's written objectively. You can satisfy in different ways. That's my only.
No, I agree. I agree with you entirely on that. My point is not that it's not, that portion of it is not objective. My point is that as a mitigant is worthless, because beyond the issue of subjective, objective, our overall goal is to try to have development that the development regulation that balances the needs of the property owner with the needs of the neighbor. And so if the goal here is to make sure the house doesn't stare into the neighbor's, bedroom or backyard, this as a finding fails to accomplish that.
Your point is well taken, Commissioner Hutt. I just wanted to correct something that Commissioner Catalano had said. And your points are definitely understood by staff, because we had those same struggles when we were working through these findings. We will be communicating those shortcomings to the City Council, and it's for the City Council to weigh. Our objective in writing these is to create an objective set of standards that can withstand HCD review.
Understood.
Practically, they work very well. That's a different question.
Well, this is, I need to support what Commissioner Hutt was just saying, because I also realize that whether you, you could say shift elevations by half a floor and sure peer right down into somebody's bedroom. Okay, I don't think that there's going to be any quantifiable metric that is going to that can't be subverted somehow, right? that you can't handle this kind of thing by trying to argue for 2 inches or 10 inches or half a story. There's always a way that it can be subverted, and this is the real issue here. Exactly as Commissioner Hutt said, that that when it gets down to the commission level, it's going to be about the applicant and the neighbor's satisfaction.
So in finding 3, sorry, 2(3), position windows to avoid placement directly opposite. Is this similar to the plate height as a mitigation, where if you change the plane by a degree or 2 of the window that you're opposite, you're no longer directly opposite?
Yeah, what's directly?
Windows that face one another.
And keep in mind also, the director does have authority to interpret these. So assuming these actually get adopted, and there's confusion like that, the director has the ability to interpret it in a way, and the director's interpretation will apply to every project going forward. So it maintains its consistency, so therefore it's objective and it's public, to avoid some of these issues that you all are pointing out.
Well, it seems like less information is safer in that respect. Saying the proposed project will respect the privacy of the adjacent residential structures, period, allows for more interpretation. And
Yeah, but that's more subjective. I mean, the problem there is the part that follows is what makes that intro objective, by saying, by listing the specific criteria that you gauge it by. If you just say, the proposed project will not invade the privacy of adjacent structures,
well, respect is different.
Then you've really gone back to subjective land. So if you're going to have an objective finding, you need all the rest of that stuff.
And I think, again, there's always degrees to these things, right? So you can say that it has to be the color blue, but you could ask what shade of blue. Maybe this is blue, maybe that's not blue, right? So every term can be more specific than every other term. So the goal, when you look at HCD's criticisms of these types of findings, what they're really trying to get at are findings like the project will be consistent with the general bulk and mass of surrounding properties. That's the stuff that HCD is trying to address. That's why we're less concerned about language like this that isn't specifically defined or more specifically defined. But again, your point's well taken. We understand.
So help me understand something you said, Deputy City Attorney. You said that the director will have review of this, but aren't these findings that would come before the commission? So what happens when there's a difference between a commission finding and the director's findings?
The director will have the ability to interpret parts of the code that are ambiguous. So, and then the director can provide that interpretation, and that interpretation binds both the director and the planning commission.
So we need to hire really good directors from now on, huh?
That's what I was thinking.
The current director, we've canceled his retirement whenever he thinks it is.
So shall we move on?
Yeah,
So-
number 3.
Number 3, small 3, Roman numeral 3, position windows to avoid placement directly opposite of windows from an adjacent residential structure. So we talked a little bit about that one. Finding number 3 is the proposed residential project reflects the scale of the nearest properties of the same use surrounding the subject property by meeting a majority of the following criteria. And there are 4 Roman numerals here. The first one is, if the subject project proposes 2 stories, then at least one of the surrounding properties must also be 2 stories. Number,
Could we go these one at a time? And I think that Romanet 1 here is totally objective and totally inequitable. So, you know, I don't have any complaints about the legality or objectivity of it, but it just seems totally wrong to me that you have to have a neighbor that have to have a second floor when second floors are allowed in R1. And there's no relief to this, right? One of the benefits of the subjectiveness is there's ways to work around. If you have a property that only is surrounded by one-story houses, you don't get a second story. That just seems totally unfair to me.
Well, it says the majority, so you have to meet 3, but not all 4. But some of the others have the same problem. I agree, John. So.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That you could do. I see that you could do 2, 3, and 4, and not that one.
Hey, John, you know where I live. You drive by my house every day almost. If you look up and down the street, we're all one story. If I wanted to put like what they call an airplane kind of second story over a part of my place, okay? Can you imagine that the people to the south of me or the people across the street to the north would be impacted in the least by my putting, say, a 500-foot master suite on the top of mine? There's no way.
Right.
There is absolutely no way that, I mean, it would be totally judgmental as to whether my proposal would be offensive or not. You can't write something like this.
And the flip side is that neighbors with 2 stories, just notwithstanding the deed restrictions. But if I put a second story on my house, there's parts that I could put it that would probably be just fine, and there are parts that would block my neighbor's view tremendously. And
and get you to look into their rear yard too.
I have a question about the 3, number 1. What is surrounding? Is that the immediate adjacent properties or the neighboring properties within 300 feet? Or what, when you say at least one of the surrounding properties also has 2 stories, what does surrounding mean?
now, we had an exhibit that we showed the commission when we were drafting something similar to this, what is adjacent or what is surrounding. And at the time, we were looking at adjacent properties that immediately abutted the subject site.
Right. And surrounding is then
Across the street as well.
across the street, but not.
And behind.
So, but there's no set of numbers that goes with that. Like when we send out the postcards, we have, 300 feet from, the center of the property kind of thing.
We could include that more detail in this and bring back that exhibit, or to specify that they're the immediately abutting properties that include the sides, the rear, and some across the street, 2 or 3 properties across the street.
Would that make it more objective?
It would quantify it.
It would, but that's more objective than just say surrounding, because
Right.
surrounding could be, well, I'm, half a mile away or whatever.
Mhm.
Well, there is an exhibit that accompanies this. And that exhibit, if we referred to it, I think it makes it clear. I don't know if Josh has it. Maybe we can pull it up. I think it would answer Commissioner Spear's questions at least.
It's just what I had said in the last meeting, Alex, that, what people think is logical to them is what they want to call objective. But, there's all kinds of, we're shaking this out right now, but we could certainly be hearing a lot of these arguments from an applicant, and we would not have streamlined a bit as a result. And that's part of the point I'm trying to make about going in this direction at all.
Yeah, and I'm not fighting you on that. Your point's well taken. I'm just saying let's not have an argument about the law right now.
Okay.
just
No,
point out,
I'm not,
point out the
I'm not
subjectivity
arguing the
of it.
law. I'm arguing about what the idea of objectivity is and how we should handle things,
Yeah.
right? You know, I've read it. I know what the law says.
Yeah. No, we
Okay.
hear you. This is going to go to the city council too, trust me.
So then it sounds like we're either going to refer to the exhibit that has a description of what surrounding property means, or we're going to add a definition of what surrounding is into the finding. Is that the takeaway?
That's what it seems like. And unfortunately, I believe that Josh, he's working from home this evening as well as Claire. And I'm not sure if they're going to have full access to the server to be able to pull those documents up.
And then that'll follow on to condition Roman 2.
Yes, the floor area ratio of the proposed project is no more than 10% above highest floor area ratio of any of the nearest properties surrounding the subject property.
So a definition of nearest properties versus the definition of surrounding.
Yeah, we've got surrounded twice and nearest once. So we need to clean those up. I also think that we need to understand that the floor area ratio of the surrounding properties, whether those are adjacent or nearest or within 300 feet or any measure, is not knowable because we measure floor area using the gross floor area, which is not something that we can find readily for other properties. So if we're going to compare properties, we need to compare it based on the square footage that's findable, the habitable square footage that's on the assessor's rolls. And so in order to compare apples to apples, we would need to have a new definition of floor area ratio that's just based on habitable square footage as reported by the assessor.
That's the only practical way for us to research that.
Right. And so keep in mind that the big issue with that, and the reason we tortured over our definition of gross floor area, is there are all sorts of ways to cheat on that. And I don't mean, I shouldn't use the word cheat. There are many ways to have a very big and bulky structure that has a lower habitable area, because you don't count the garage, you don't count a whole bunch of stuff that we do count in our definition of gross floor area. So 2 points on Romanet 2. One is it needs to change so that it can be objectively determined. The other is that it doesn't do a good job, even if you fix it, for the whole point of reflecting the scale of the neighborhood because of the inadequacy of the information that we have from the assessor's rolls. And I think a much better way to do that test would just be to do a percentage of the allowable floor area, which is, you know, what we did in our thresholds.
We'll look into that.
All right, Romanet 3 has the same definitional thing. We've added a third definition now of adjacent.
So this reads, massing that is higher than structures located on adjacent properties or concentrated away from adjacent single-story structures unless the subject property is surrounded by single-story structures, in which case massing will be concentrated in the center. That was our attempt at trying to push massing of a second floor to the center of that structure or away from adjacent single-story buildings, or to respond to a site conditions.
By the way, adjacent is defined in our zoning code as means two or more objects which are located in close proximity to each other. So if we want to be objective, perhaps we avoid the term adjacent.
Also, we should put a qualifier as to the center of what. In other words, in which case massing will be concentrated in the center could be interpreted as I want it to be in the center of the lot. And depending on the siding of your house, that could be the very front of the house. So we should, if it's the center of the house that we're looking for the mass to be concentrated in, we should probably qualify that a little bit better.
I've got a concern. If you've got a 2-story house uphill and then downhill, you're adding a 2nd story and you push the 2nd story towards the uphill house that's 2 stories because the downhill neighbor is 1 story, aren't you more likely to block their views than if it was moved away?
That's probably the impact that would occur, as many times as the Planning Commission has requested applicants to push the massing of a 2nd floor towards the upslope of the property.
That happens regularly, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that hearing is going to be full of people saying, I don't think that. Well, I don't think that. Okay, is really objective, guys.
All right, were there any other questions on Romanet 3?
Or to increase greater flexibility, instead of saying concentrated in the center of the house, or.
See, Vincent, excuse me, but saying that it's going to be concentrated in the center of the house, if this were on a smaller lot, you may have effectively made an argument to squeeze that 2nd story down to, well, what they would otherwise be allowed to do, and it would be based on there's nothing in here that says that, well, you can push and shove, but the applicant still gets to build what they were otherwise allowed to build as a 2nd story. It's like highly non-objective, and it could be, it could just push and squeeze a 2nd story addition into oblivion here. I mean, the way these are written, what personally interests me in part is that the way these things are written, I could hear the discussion going on at juries in architecture school about whether something works or doesn't work from the standpoint of, oh, did you move this far away enough? Do they still have enough? In like to Commissioner Dallas's thing about, well, is it too high up against the uphill building, and there would be discussion that would be going on for some time about this, and none of it would, at least in architecture studio, it admittedly is not trying to be objective in the least. We know we're dealing subjectively there, but it's kind of like there's still if somebody wants to contend, there's still all kinds of room for interpretation in here, non-objectively.
I would agree with you, and that's why earlier in our discussion I mentioned that to make these more effective, and it would still be very constraining, these would end up having to be read more like design guidelines.
Now I want it to be clear, I think you and staff have done a beautiful job the way you're writing this. Okay, so I feel like I'm cranking a lot tonight, but I'm not. Who laughed?
John.
But it's not at you. It's not at you because I think this is very, very nicely done the way it is. It's just showing up the fact that it's not going to do what it's supposed to do, and that there's a tremendous amount of difficulty in terms of the interpretation, no matter how well you write this. And I do think you guys have done a great job. And so any of my beefing tonight, I do not want it to be construed as my complaining about the job that you and the staff have done on it, because that is not the case here.
I have a question on what the intro part clause means. Massing that is higher than the structures located on adjacent properties. Is that getting at an issue of the total square footage is higher than? Is that greater than, or does that mean properties that are taller than, and so the sort of top heavy properties?
It's the latter.
Okay.
So maybe we want to change that to taller rather than higher, if it sounds.
Yeah, because higher it could mean greater than or taller than, and so I think it's somewhat of an ambiguous term.
All right, Romanet 4.
Second stories are stepped back from the face of the first floor by at least the depth of the eave or a minimum of 18 inches. Basically to try to get some articulation into the building design.
I think that this one is objective. Although I guess you could question whether you're talking about the first floor eave or the second floor eave. But I think that the goal of having articulation here is although good, is going to result in very much more increased construction costs, because usually you line up your walls, and if you have a wall that's offset 18 inches, then you're going to have all sorts of support issues. And so a lot of times if you're going to articulate, it's better to go, one room deep, so you can line up your second story outside wall with an interior wall. And this, I remember, was a pet peeve of Don Watts, who used to talk about how these kind of minor step backs on the second floor would, especially in earthquake land, would precipitously increase costs of construction.
That's why it says at least the depth of the eave. Up to the depth of the first room, as you said, right?
Well, so.
But the issue is if you articulate and you have some that's, straight up 2 stories, and then you have a part that goes in, you can do that. But this is requiring the full second story to be set back. So there's no place that you're going to be able to have that straight line, and that's a very typical design style for a lot of different types of houses, and it's economical construction.
I agree with that.
So what is the remedy here? Would you omit it in entirety or modify it?
Well, I mean, the problem is if you admit it, then you've got fewer ways to deal with this. But the other thing you could do is have articulation rules similar to what we have in the commercial zone, where you have only so many linear feet that's not that doesn't have some change to it, and for so many X feet of linear feet, you have to have so many feet set back. That kind of thing is pretty typical in these objective standard types things.
And we're getting very much like design guidelines as well.
Yes, yes.
That's where we would, it presents itself the best possible way to convey this information to an applicant. They end up being design guidelines, which we're not going to be able to do in this effort.
So I guess my question then is, if we leave this, then that can be the criteria that they don't listen to and build economically on the end of the house, as long as they comply with the other 3.
Right.
So the remedy to this, I guess, is that you have to comply with the other three. Is that right?
That seems to be the case, yes.
Well, in one of them, Commissioner Dennison is going to be just a go or no go, because it isn't you own the property, you want to build. Number one, if surrounding properties, none of them is 2 stories, then that'll immediately you have no design choice there. You're immediately not getting to use that one if they're non-adjacent. So that leaves you're gonna comply with two of three, maybe.
We can't, it says majority, which is 3 out of 4.
So if you take 4 out and then you have 3 left, you just have to comply with 2, which seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, you'd be lucky to be able to design something to comply with 2 out of 3, right?
Yeah, yes.
So what's the recommendation here from the commission? Is the recommendation to leave the 4th one and comply with 3, or remove it and comply with 2?
Remove it and comply with 2 is what I would recommend.
I agree.
Commissioners Hutt, Catalano, Pevsner?
All right.
I don't know. I thought our job here was to sort of point out things that we think don't work and that can be worked on. I don't have a recommendation other than don't do this. I think that, again, going back to, I know this is an old saw, but if we put this in and we find it doesn't work because it's adding tremendous costs to people's construction, we don't, I mean, we could eliminate it from the set of findings, but we can't go back to our old findings. So.
Right.
Okay, should we move on to finding 4?
Yes, building masts and roof lines shall be stepped to follow the natural contours of the building of the slope as identified in a topographic map prepared by land surveyor of record.
Does this mean before or after they submit a lot grading?
It's probably going to have to be before. So when they design it to follow the natural grade, natural contours of the site.
So
Well,
then
there are two ways to address that, and one of them I'm not clear on exactly how what we're dealing with right now specifically relates to the threshold for having to have licensed professionals to submit. Okay, I'm not clear on that part of the roadmap right at the moment, but if I would like to see eventually that that we have a land surveyor and or civil engineer. They often work together on buildings above a certain threshold as part of the planning submission. We've seen difficulties with that not being handled properly in the past. The other thing is that if there is an architect involved, then it is certainly part of due diligence for that architect to have gotten sufficient grading and slope information together to be able to design correctly around ideas like this. So I think that what we really need to do is go back on our roadmap and cross-check how this relates to some of our other requirements for architects, for licensed individuals. So I can't give you an answer right now, but I'm saying that this is a place where we would really have to cross-check and know that know that there was going to be some responsibility to the actual grading as part of a submittal.
Well, and so I guess my question being, if we're talking before you do any kind of grading, are we saying that you kind of need to tier your house up and up and up and up as you go back so that you maintain the natural contours of the slope as identified in the topographic map?
You would reference the slope. So much like some of the building envelopes that are shown in the hillside management zone, it's that same concept.
So
Yeah,
if the back of your lot is extra high, then you can build your roof extra high because you're following that natural contour?
Or at least reference the slope of that roof to reflect the natural terrain, not necessarily duplication of the slope.
A couple of things. One is in the HMZ, as you mentioned, there is a definition of natural slope that perhaps we could incorporate so that we understand what slope we're talking about. The other question I have is when we talk about stepping the roof line, how long can a roof go with at a horizontal straight pitch before it needs to be stepped? Do I need to have 85 steps, 2 steps? If I have a small house, is it okay to just have one across and say, well, it's small, so we don't really need to step it? Or does every single roof have to have at least one grade change if the slope isn't flat?
And what if it is the house is, here's the slope and the house is perpendicular to the slope. So in the downslope direction, it's actually very narrow, but long running across. Then of course there's only going to be one. You know, this kind of suggests that the house is going to be a long skinny thing going down the hill, right? But maybe none is necessary. Again, we're back in design studio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess Commissioner or Vice Chair Catalano, I guess the land surveyor of record is what you were trying to get better clarity on. I mean, what does of record mean? Does that mean that I've used them before in their of record, or does that mean that they're
Licensed?
by professional, licensed? Yeah, because that's
Well,
we might want to take that up.
Yeah, I could answer that. Of record, whether you're talking about the architect of record, an engineer of record, the civil engineer, or the land surveyor, quote unquote, of record means the licensed professional who is putting his or her stamp on the set of drawings for this project. I'm on record with the city of Sierra Madre as being the responsible architect for project. That's all of record means. It means you're on the hook for this project legally.
Do we have minimum standards in the code as to what kind of a report we'll accept as a land survey?
It would have to be prepared by a licensed surveyor and stamped accordingly.
It's a whole area that would really be, because some of the implications for some of the other things that we have talked about, some of them directly involved here and some not directly involved here. It would be great when we get to sit back for a moment to be able to roadmap exactly where we're calling for licensed individuals and where we should, how it should all work. I think we could get some clarity there.
One of the notes that I wrote to myself on this is that I think it would be very helpful if staff prepared a list of exhibits that they would ask for from an applicant, and who is authorized to present those exhibits, because we're in addition to architectural drawings, we're looking at contours and grading and things like and trees and planting and things like that. And so these are going to all be reference materials for our objective evaluation of the application. And so, I think it'd be helpful if at the beginning we said, we're going to ask for this list of what needs to be on that list, because and maybe even cross-reference it to each one of these findings that need to be met. So you can say, okay, finding 4 says the natural contours, and that is found on, document whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that we have references and we can say, no, objectively, this is what we see.
I've already started on that. A couple of people that I have discussed it with, I think, don't let me put words in anybody's mouth, but I think with Chair Dennison and maybe with Commissioner Hutt also, that it's a very, very broad subject, and it just could not be included in what we're trying to do here within these constraints. But yes, Commissioner Spear, I have already started working on trying to frame that thing as but something broad and conceptual that is going to be down perhaps down the road if we want to look at it.
And also, as mentioned in the staff report, and I think I alluded to earlier, where staff is finding that the design review findings that we're looking at reviewing now will appear to add cost to a project.
Yeah, this is going to be a much more expensive process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one thing I think we should point out, is as we review these, we're thinking about the big project that the Planning Commission reviews, but keep in mind these are the same findings for administrative design review.
Right.
Yeah. So if I have a 2,200 square foot house and I put a 300 square foot addition and it's down slope, I'm now going to be subject to these.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to hire a land surveyor to do a topographic map. And Joe, you can tell me how many thousands of dollars that costs, but if I'm just doing a small addition that for whatever reason trips the administrative design review permit, now I've got to do this topographic map and potentially have to step my roof where, even if it were in the back, right? Because there's nothing that says in here, as long as it's not visible from the street or anything like that. It's just yet another one of the downfalls of a one-size-fits-all kind of rule.
Well, I was to answer your question in part. I recently was working on a small project. I wouldn't have taken it except it was a favor for somebody I know. The lot would appear to be flat. It was in Pasadena, and but I knew it was just off enough with enough of a slope from front to rear that if we didn't pay attention to it, it was going to cause trouble with the floor levels versus grade. And so I had a licensed land surveyor come in to give me the necessary spot elevations all around the project so that we knew we were good that way. By the way, if I hadn't had it done and I just drew everything as a straight line grade, the way some applicants do, I would have been in trouble during construction. That would have cost the applicant a lot of money. Okay, but that whole exercise cost the applicant an additional $1,000. That was it. Okay, and I knew we were good.
And to add to Vincent's, to Director Gonzalez's point about what we intend to include in the staff report, we do also intend to include the cost of all these reports that would be generated under the findings that we proposed, because the City Council should know that. And I think what we're doing right now is very, very, very helpful, because we're going to come up with some findings that staff has considered a lot and that the Planning Commission has given us feedback for. And they're the best findings we can come up with, and we're going to give them all the reasons why, all the shortcomings that they face if they do adopt these findings. So it's important for Planning Commission, the City Council, to have all that information in front of them. And so the more information you provide us, the more we can provide to the city council.
Then what we're up against here is that, there's unfortunately in construction, this kind of construction, there's always a way to do something cheaper, right? You have people that are working really, really cheap, people who do things by the seat of their pants, and I've seen that they don't know much about even basic building codes but they still have a voice as at the city council, like the rest of us do, that are always complaining that something is more expensive. All right. Well, of course it's more expensive. There's always a cheaper way to do everything, and the city council has to realize that just somebody invoking the word expensive when they're trying to work so cheap and so far beyond the radar is really not the tail that's supposed to wag the dog here.
Right,
There's two sides to this as far as any issue with the council goes and the costs. I agree with you. There's balance in there, okay, but it isn't all driven by somebody whining that what we're doing is more expensive.
All right. Number 5, street-facing garages and carports are set back from the primary building facade. I have a question about this.
And staff was going to say that we were going to propose to omit this finding.
Okay, then.
That's fantastic because it is in direct contradiction to our Stonegate design guidelines. So I was going to ask which one would win in the event of these two.
Right.
That was easy. Best one of the night. Thank you. Number 6, wood frame windows, fiberglass windows, or metal framed windows colored by the manufacturer are used. Vinyl or similar windows are not used. The use of shutters appears to be functional and proportionate to window size.
I don't get the shutter part. I mean, does that mean they have to work or appear to be, or do we have a lot of houses with shutters in town?
They could appear to be operable. Many times we'll see, say, an 8-foot wide window.
With a 2-foot wide shutter.
And a 2-foot wide shutter.
Yeah, okay. Well, isn't that an architectural school of something or other? Neoclassical.
Don't get them started.
New England cottage or something? I don't know. The architects need to weigh in on that.
Because architects probably are not going to even do silly decoration things like that to begin with. You're just talking about exterior decorators here.
Okay, so some homeowners are going to nail a couple of shutters after.
Yeah, but they're totally
fact is okay. Not
totally silly looking.
Okay.
Question about proportionate to window size. Does that mean that it can't exceed 120% of the window size or be less than 80% of the window size? Seems like something that we might want to
be able to cover the window as to appear operable. If it were an operable shutter, then it would have to function as a shutter that would cover the window opening.
Here comes the storm. When you close them, you've protected the entire window. All right? If you got an 8-foot window and you got a 1-foot shutter on either side, it's obviously just phony.
Can the shutter be, if it's an 8-foot window, can you have 8 feet of shutter on one side? That is then a functional shutter.
That's true. That's true.
Or 6 and 2.
6 and 2.
That's because where shutters were really used, like in New England, the windows were typically not that wide. There would have been 2 or 3 narrower windows that would have been able to functionally work with shutters on either side.
That's why we use the term proportionate to window size.
Well, not to be a troublemaker, but if you had an 8-foot window and you had 2-foot shutters on each side that were bifold, that would cover the 8-foot window.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Okay. Of all
agree.
the stuff for us to get
Functional.
spun up about, I mean, we want to get to be objective. I think the shutter thing is illustrative of the rabbit hole we could go down.
So help me understand why.
We're even talking about shutters.
Yes, but why are we saying that vinyl windows are not used?
I was waiting for someone to comment about that. What I hear from, for instance, our building official, contractors, they tend to discolor, they tend to track when it's a slider, and they also are prone to warping. So it's just a very, typically they're nail-on block frame windows, replacement windows.
So we would prefer people to have 80 to 90-year-old windows than upgrade them to vinyl windows if that's all they can afford?
No. I'm trying to create a higher bar here.
What about vinyl clad wood frame windows?
That's fine.
This to me reads like a development standard, not a design review finding. I think it's, for the most part, objective, except for maybe similar windows. But yeah, this doesn't seem like, I mean, this is a kind of issue that you bury somewhere in development standards. It's not like a main design finding. I don't really have a huge issue with it. It just, it's a very minor little point.
Yeah, and I would agree. That's why, as I said earlier, these are starting to sound more like guidelines or development standards.
Yeah, I agree.
Regardless of what kind of window you use, there is also the reason why it really is a development standard in a way is that one hallmark of a really cheap piece of construction is when you see the window frames and the glass and they're like dead flush with the exterior stucco, right? So it looks like the walls are 3 inches thick. The regressing of the window frames so that there's some depth there is part of what really wants to be addressed to keep something from looking like a cheap piece of construction. And when we talk about that, then I think that we really are into a development standard.
Yeah, staff discussed that, and I used an example in the city of Pasadena for multifamily projects. Windows are required, or they were when I was there, to be recessed 6 inches. That meant you would end up with a double wall.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it's whatever you require. I mean, there's, if we were to go, Vincent, and study really good-looking old houses in Sierra Madre that may have been very innocently built in the old days, we get a better idea of what our standard ought to be here. Okay, I'm the historic consultant on a mansion in Flint Ridge right now, where we're replacing all of the windows with newly manufactured wood windows, and our walls are 10 inches thick, right? And there's an awful lot of regress, an awful lot of depth in there, but the house is 10,000 square feet too, so it all it definitely is proportionately working well. But we could check that out when we get to if we want to examine that as a development standard. I mean, I'm in agreement with you that the vinyl windows, phony muttons, that kind of stuff. They all really cheapen the appearance of a house. Whenever we get to look at it offline a little bit, I think that the amount of regress and what we ought to be asking for inside of rather than the block nailing thing that you were talking about before, we ought to have a look at that too.
Right.
So then, as
make a
we
note for
talk
future
about
reference.
this particular finding, do we think that it should stay? I heard some people recommending removing it as it's more of a guideline than it should be a design review. What was the commission's recommendation on this one?
Chair, could I add something on that point?
Please.
I think the legislator did something creative and clever here. They didn't say we're getting rid of discretionary design review. What they said is we're going to require objective standards. But as we're working through this now, and as staff's been working through it, we came to the realization a while back that everything we draft is going to sound like development standards. Because once you take out the discretion and subjectivity that comes with the design review process, your objective findings are going to sound a lot different than they are. So I would ask that maybe we keep it in and we just provide the city council with an example of what objective findings would look like, and leave it to the council to determine whether or not they want to go with it or not go with it. That's just my recommendation, because I think we're going to get a lot of development standard like design review findings when we deal with objective design review.
Yeah,
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, that was a good argument for leaving the findings the way they are and let other bigger towns experiment with what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I have a couple of points on this, whether we call it a design standard or a finding or whatnot, wherever it goes. I generally have a concern with specifying a limited set of materials that can be used, even if those are the preferred materials now. As we've seen, our code doesn't get updated that much. And, what if ceramic windows come out or some newfangled product? You can't use them. And that, so I
agree.
I know this verges into subjectivity, but where we say things like use quality materials such as, that at least provides the flexibility to be innovative and have out of the box kind of thinking, whereas this doesn't. The other question I have is, the windows have to be colored by the manufacturer. Does that mean we can't paint them?
Oh, if they're not wood windows you'd be able to stain or paint. But if you're specifying an inherent color by the manufacturer, you'd want those to be throughout that material.
You could just take out that whole phrase "colored by the manufacturer." It's all right. I mean, they're either going to be painted or they're going to be, they're either going to be factory painted or they're going to be field painted. I don't think anybody's going to leave them raw, are they?
I want to follow up on a point that John made that I think should be in part of what the thinking is, that one of the things I was very impressed with, it's also very difficult and odd about this Sierra Madre Planning Commission, is when you had somebody smart like Manish who is in the room, is that they would make suggestions to the applicant about, hey, you know what? They make solar panels that will fit inside of a wood of a metal roof, standing seam roof, and that while we often got criticized for doing their work for them, the end result was that the project was better for the city, and it was a better project. And so yes, maybe we shouldn't specify what kind of wood frame windows or what kind of windows there are, because things change, but also the process that in Sierra Madre that the applicant gets to go through when they see us is that there are suggestions made that sometimes improves the project, so that we can stomach it without a back and forth that is more aggressive and unhappy. And I know that we get criticized for that on times, but you know, at the end of the day, we end up with a project that we can vote yes on, and the applicant gets a project that they can walk away from and walk away with and build. And the more you get to these objective standards, then it's either this or it's not this, and then it's more, there's a little more tension built into the process. So yeah, let's keep our options open, and let's make sure that we can have a discussion with the applicant about, hey, you know, can you do A instead of B?
And I like Commissioner Hutt's suggestion of revising that finding to include, to use quality materials such as.
Yeah.
Well, if I had my druthers, I would prefer that, but I'm not sure that we don't verge into subjectivity though at that point.
Yeah, what are cheap materials then?
Mhm.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, Vincent.
All right. So then it sounds like you have guidance on 6. Moving on to 7, design material changes occurred intersecting planes at inside corners of changing wall planes or where architectural elements intersect, such as a chimney, pilaster, or projection.
I defer to all my architectural friends here to what does that ever mean?
Well, the intersecting plane can be an outside corner, and you certainly don't want a material change such as masonry on an outside corner.
What we're trying to get at is that you have to wrap exterior corners, terminate at an interior corner. So the material doesn't appear just like an applique.
Okay, we haven't quite gotten there yet with that comment.
I think we borrowed this particular finding from another city.
Yeah, I think we've seen many, what's the term, cheap facade that applied inarticulately that just comes across as looking even worse. So I think this is a good concept. But again, my concern here is with the objectivity itself, that you don't provide any option if it's well thought out to go to change this. So, you know, a lot of people have, for instance, things on their wall that are sort of like art projections, but that's a material change that's sort of free form, perhaps. That's not going to be allowed.
Or if you're building one of those old Western movie sets things where the front of the building is a giant facade and the back of it is a box kind of thing. But yeah, I guess. Yeah, I see what you're trying to do. I'm not sure it captures everything you want, because there's some parts of a building that you want to wrap around and dye at another corner, you know, so that it doesn't, so that as you drive by the building, you see maybe the brick underneath the windows from 2 angles instead of just one.
Right.
So, you know, I certainly don't want a bunch of buildings that only look good when you're standing directly in front of the front door. But if you move, you know, 10 feet to either side, it's it's something else. So,
Yeah.
But I'm not an architect, and I don't know how to describe that.
We can think of architectural styles that not objectively, but in our subjective opinion would look good, that would violate this rule. I mean, a lot of sort of classical architecture has big sort of blocks on the corners, you know, and then you transition into a stucco. Also, there's a lot of organic forms that sort of evolve. I mean, the famous one being the sort of craftsman wall that starts off of field stone and then transitions into brick.
Yeah.
At the Gamble House, and that looks really cool. Of course, if it's done well. And again, that wouldn't be allowed by this.
They have some great faux stones that you can do that in, John.
I understand. You know, if you just put a little bit of it on, it's
Yeah, some of them are doing a really great job of recycling plastics.
So, so are we saying that we recommend more, another pass at this, or are we concerned that there may be exceptions that are sufficient to make this not worth including?
I actually think it's fairly decent, but you have to clarify the outside corner issue, which is what most of those comments were about. And the field stones turning into brick, it's all masonry. You could argue it's all just masonry. So I think it's actually pretty good, but I'd clarify the outside corner issue.
Well, it should say that wrap exterior corners.
If you look at D-4.6 of the Stonegate designs, it reads, changes in materials should generally occur when there is a change in the plane of the facade. If possible, the change in material should occur on inside corners of the building. So that might be a reference section to contour some language out of. That's Delta-4.6.
But if we just reuse that one?
Well, I think there you've got the issue of the generally.
Yeah, it said it needs to be cleaned up because it said where possible, generally, and those would need to get cleaned up. But that might be more of what you're looking for in the inside corner.
Okay, we'll take a look.
Yeah, and the inside corner is really a big issue because as somebody pointed out a little while ago, when you see that kind of change at an outside corner, it usually just totally gives it away that it's just an applique on the building,
That's why it would have to wrap that exterior corner and terminate at the nearest interior corner. And the nearest interior corner example could be a chimney, because that projects out beyond the wall plane.
Yeah, so if we can rework it the way we're talking about it, the way you just read a minute ago.
How big does the projection need to be? Can I just nail a 2x4 on the side and then run my fake rock up to it? Because then I've transitioned out
back to the street.
It's always a cheaper way to do everything, John.
Now, I forgot to address the faux stone, which I dislike. So you have to have real cut stone.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
So we'll take a look at the Stonegate reference, and E and F remained the same, and G was amended by the commission, and we didn't modify that either.
I have a question for my architectural colleagues about G. And it has to do with when we receive computer renderings that are supposedly in scale and in sight lines that are correct. And I know from having done this a few times, one of the examples is that they show a person standing in front of the house and what they see when they look out, and so they show sight lines. And I'll go to the same place, and it's like maybe they've programmed the computer to make that person 12 feet tall or 3 feet tall. So I'm basically a suspicious person. I admit that. And that old deal, figures don't lie, but liars figure. Are there ways to manipulate the renderings that we get that show things in different proportion than actually they are built? And then the next follow-up for that is there a standard so that from this point of view, a person that is rendered is going to be 6 feet tall, and this is what it's going to look like? Does that make sense?
Yes, to answer the first part of your question, yes, there are all kinds of ways to manipulate it.
I'm afraid
Whether there's any kind of an honest standard, I don't know.
I don't think there are any standards. It's kind of an evolving field. And what I've seen so far on the Planning Commission, I would guess is an error of manipulation so much as just inaccurate.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's all malicious. But there would be a way for making a big house look kind of small if you made that little person taller. So
Yeah.
how do we, I mean, we want to be objective. And so how do we ask for the information correctly so that we can all agree that this is the way it's going to be?
The developer even did that to you guys with the Kensington renderings.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I could look into it, I guess.
Well, if objectivity is where this process is going, I think at some point in time, someone's going to have to agree on what the objective standard is. And
Right.
it ain't me. I know that I don't know it, but I can smell fish somewhere, you know, something. So every now and then when I go out with these drawings, it's like, I'm confused. So I don't know.
I'm a big fan. I think I'm the only one that's a fan of story poles because they will tell you if you're standing across the street looking up at a project on the hill where the ridge line is.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right.
And there were some projects up at One Carter I looked at and went, I don't think that's right. But, you know, the project was nice and it was all good enough. But the rendering was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm not, it's not my vocation, so I'm not skilled enough to, you know, parse out the problem. You know, and I feel for staff because they get these drawings in and they're in an office and they're looking at it and like, okay, it fulfills this requirement, but at the end of the day, is it objective and does it accurately reflect the project that the community is going to have to look at for the next 75 years?
Well, if the project is big enough, the ability to fake these things is only subject to how much money you're going to put into it.
Okay, well, I don't know what I mean, I don't have an elegant solution for this, but I once again, I see this as something of concern.
Sometime offline, Bob, I'll tell you what I know about how the videos of the World Trade Center collapsing were faked. Okay, but I'm not going to go into it right now.
I think
So let's keep moving.
Wait, there is a way to get really accurate, I think, with those renderings, but it's expensive.
Okay.
You have to have a proof of how they imported the topographic map and, you know, they actually pinned all the corners exactly. And, you know, a lot of architects don't have that kind of budget.
Yeah.
No, there's stuff out there. There's stuff out there in the marketplace, as you know, that is basically just being peddled to the homeowner about how you too can make a rendering of you know your house design, right? And it's just.
So maybe the answer is more story polls or things that everybody can stand around and agree on, you know, what it is, things that we can measure.
If you want a realistic measured view of what's really going to happen, that's unfortunately why I like story polls.
Okay, I'm okay with story polls.
And either solution will add or contribute costs to the project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, again, if the standard is
Activity comes at a cost.
Vincent, is going to be, you know, what the homeowner can get, or the half professional, half amateur designer can get online for you know very little money or maybe even for free, then yes, any kind of a professional and any kind of professional software is going to be adding cost to the job. All right, what's the standard here? There's always a way to go cheaper.
Right.
All right, so Director Gonzalez, I think that is everything that you've brought before us. Is there any other feedback that you would like from us for your next iteration?
No, I think the commission, I appreciate your thoroughness of going through this material, and I think staff has the direction to move forward with the edits.
I have a question on the planned applicability of these to commercial projects. Because in the staff report, you said that these were tailored to residential development.
Right.
And so we need a separate set of findings for commercial development.
Or we retain the existing findings for commercial development that are in the code now.
Okay. So, I mean, the plan wouldn't be to just adopt these findings and then leave a hole so there's no findings for commercial.
No.
I've got a
Thank you.
question. It's a terminology question. Where I came from, standards were the municipal code. Guidelines were something that were nice to achieve to get to the code issues. And so guidelines are the wish list from the town. Standards are the code. Do we have any sort of definition in here, Madre, in that regard?
I would have to check the municipal code to see if there's something that specific, but I don't believe there is.
All right.
Wow, that could be really significant. That could be really significant because there's a lot of things we're talking about that maybe should just be guidelines, which would create more flexibility about how they're being used, rather than people being hammered if they're ordinance. It's a very interesting point, Commissioner.
Yeah, up in Los Gatos, the code was, pretty straightforward. But then there's this whole flip through little book of guidelines for residential work that showed you all kinds of pictures of examples of what would, how you achieve these different sorts of effects and desired results. And it was very easy to consume.
Yeah, and even the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties has standards, and then they have guidelines too, right? Even for something that's very, very rigorous, like that discipline is.
Yeah, in town, we only have one set of guidelines. That's the Stone Gate Design Guidelines, and that was adopted as part of a settlement. So all the rest of our code is standards that are applicable. And we've talked a number of times about developing guidelines to help, but we've never got around to that. And I think it would be a very helpful thing.
Stonegate book is very nice to look through. Yeah.
All right, and then I think that the changes that we had on the stuff that came from the subcommittee was that we're going to go with 90 and 95% as our two thresholds. And there was an E that needed to be added to angle plane.
Mhm.
Were there other changes that I have not captured?
Yeah, we wanted to have the 2,500 as well, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that had already been included in there, but yes, we want the 2,500 added in.
Clarify.
All right. Anything else in regards to this public hearing?
So I guess I have a question about what our plan going forward is. At our next meeting, we're going to have a public hearing that includes noticing of the development standards in chapter 1748, so we could adopt those
Yes,
or recommend those.
right.
So our plan is to recommend those changes to the city council.
That's correct. That meeting was noticed last Saturday.
And what materials do we want for that? We've talked about in a resolution, and I think the assistant city attorney said that it would be better instead of trying to modify the resolution to provide a memo addressing concerns or explaining what we did. Is that right?
I actually didn't understand the question. I think the memo would be a good idea.
The memo is a good idea. So should we then try to take the subcommittee memo and update it to be a memo from the planning commission to the city council? Is the planning commission, do you want us to do that?
Yeah, because I think staff is going to draft its staff report noting, it's going to provide the city council with all the different options. So it's going to include comments on the planning commission's option. And the memo can be an opportunity for the planning commission to just include any additional things it wants to add.
Okay.
Is that something that the subcommittee, I know that we can't work on that as a whole, so I assume that the subcommittee is going to update that memo. Is that right, Commissioner Hutt?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take the memo that we already have and update it to match the code, the changes that the full commission has done. If we want to go beyond that, I don't know what our capacity to do more than that is, like a full-blown discussion. I guess what I'm getting at is, do we want to have a full-blown discussion of why we think the thresholds are better than changing the design findings themselves?
I think that's definitely within your right. I mean, you would have that opportunity as a member of the city, so you could do that and have that correspondence with the city council. I think it's appropriate to include it in the memo itself. I would even encourage, if you'd like, after you see the revised set of findings and you collectively review it and you have criticisms of it, to include those specific criticisms of each finding in your memo that goes to city council. That could be an option, if that makes sense.
Which revised findings are you speaking of?
The findings that we're going to present at the next
findings we just reviewed by staff.
But I don't think we're going to have time. I mean, we're going to get those at the next meeting, and we've got to approve at the next meeting. So unless we want to have a really long meeting where we all sit together and write a memo, I don't think we're going to be able to do that.
It's going to be a long memo.
Well, I think that, I think that if I'm hearing the deputy city attorney right, what he's saying is that we can write a memo that summarizes why we have put forth what the commission's best consensus is on the path forward, and why we've surgically gone through the various zonings, how the changes we made to the zoning map to the different criteria, and why it is that we feel, we all know, we've all discussed how we feel, right? So the subcommittee could come up with that memo, and then they will be presenting from staff another set of findings. We wouldn't be able to edit that memo as a group there. It would be too time consuming, right? So I think that if I'm hearing him correctly, he's saying individually, we can put together our own personal feelings about those and submit them either electronically so that they're in the record, or present them in person at the meeting. Is that right?
No, I was actually thinking, because we're going to present new revised findings based on the feedback we received today, that when we go through those findings again at the next meeting, I'm sure you'll have additional thoughts and concerns. And then perhaps you can appoint one person to summarize all those thoughts and concerns, and just to update the memo that you're going to present to the planning commission. And then so everything that was discussed at the meeting, that's the consensus essentially. And those comments can just be added to the memo and sent along to the city council. Does that make sense?
Will the memo, I guess maybe I'm confused. I was under the impression that if we're going to have a memo come from commission and be included in the packet, that we need to have it drafted and done by the end of our next meeting.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you can have it done after your meeting. It just needs to be in it should get to the city council with the city council packet for sure.
Which is on October 27th.
So it would need to be to staff by a week ahead, is that right?
Yes.
It's the resolution that and the changes to the code that needs to get done by the next meeting. That needs to be wrapped up and done.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is the 15th, and so the deadline for submission would be the 20th, which would be the following Tuesday. So you'd have, 3, 4, 5 days. That's about it to produce.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have we wouldn't have the capability as a full commission to review that memo, would we?
That's the issue. That's why I said if the planning commission, after considering all those findings at the next meeting, appointed one person to summarize what the discussion was for each finding and then to just include that in the memo, I think that'd be maybe the best way to go. But you're right. Unless you held a special meeting, you wouldn't have another opportunity to discuss it collectively.
But the commissioners, as just citizens of town, have the ability to write a memo or an email to the city council anyhow, right?
Correct. And that would be included in the record we present to the city council.
So, I mean, to me, I guess I would prefer to have a memo that we prepare and that the whole commission reviews and says, this is the planning commission memo. And maybe we can talk generally about the concepts of the objective findings, but not, you know, specifically, because we don't have them yet. And then to the extent individual commissioners want to supplement, they can write their own letters. Because then, you know, if one commissioner says something that somebody else doesn't agree with, it's just their position, and it seems a lot cleaner to me.
Yeah, we can do it that way.
I agree with you, Commissioner Hutt. I think the right path forward is to have one clear, concise memo about what it is that we recommend, and we can finalize that at the next meeting, have the subcommittee bring it forth to us for the next meeting, and then agree to it at that meeting. And anything that happens in that meeting that we feel passionately about, we can individually, or we probably have the ability to appoint a subcommittee to draft a subcommittee memo that gets included as well. Is that right, Deputy City Attorney?
Correct.
So
I,
we'll
I
have that
agree
option.
with you. I agree with you all about one basic memo, one that fundamentally covers our position as a commission. And I think that'll drive the council crazy if there's you know, multiplicity of different opinions, different memos coming from the commissioners. We should definitely have that one unified statement.
All right, so I guess we're all in agreement that we need to continue the public hearing to our next meeting on October 15th. Do I have a motion to do so?
So
Yeah,
moved.
I don't think we're continuing the public hearing because we have to have a new public hearing because it's re-noticed so we can include chapter 1748.
Right, so we're basically giving direction for staff to prepare the municipal code text amendment and the resolution and ordinance.
So we're continuing this hearing and then having a new hearing on just,
Public hearing.
I'm sorry, say that again?
We're directing staff to schedule the matter for a public hearing at your next meeting.
Would somebody like to make that motion?
Also move.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Pevsner?
He's on mute.
He is on mute. All right, all those opposed? He came off mute.
Yeah, I vote aye.
Okay. So we have a unanimous decision. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for passionate conversation tonight. Next up, our Planning Commission reports.
I have one thing.
Yes, sir.
So a week ago, we had an earthquake in town, and it brings back the fact that we still have unreinforced masonry buildings that haven't been retrofitted, and a few other issues that we've brought forward. So I'd like a report from the director as to, you know, where are we in that process, and have any buildings been retrofitted? Are we any safer than we were when we started this process 3 years ago?
No commercial buildings have been retrofitted. We do have a draft ordinance that's in queue and ready to go to the Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay.
Any other planning commission reports?
I have none.
Planning and community preservation staff reports.
The only thing I wanted to remind the commission is that the city council will be conducting a live meeting at Memorial Park on October 13th as their city council meeting. The commercial code amendment is on that agenda, as well as the housing element update. And those two items are the only items. Parking code, which is supposed to go in tandem with the commercial code, has been postponed to October 27th.
Was there a particular reason that that was postponed?
We wanted to see exactly what the council was going to adopt as part of the commercial code amendment, and if there were any changes to coordinate those changes with the parking code.
When is the staff agenda packet going to come out for that we can take a look at?
That will be, usually comes out on a Thursday or Friday. It should be posted online.
Okay, so that's about a week from today.
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be next week. And that concludes my comments.
All right. Well, I guess we will adjourn to our regularly scheduled meeting of October 15th.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.